Next up, we got Michael Yap, who's heading up the product design team at Etsy, and he's going to be talking about how to create the right conditions for design to flourish. So everyone, please give the warmest of welcomes to Michael.
Hello. Can everyone hear me? Yes? Kyle, yay. So my name is Michael. I'm so pleased to be here today to share experiences and ideas and hopefully some wisdom. And I've felt this really deep sense of connection with everyone who I've met today, and I hope you feel that too. So thank you to Figma for creating this very special time and place for us. So I'm here to tell you the story of unintended leadership. And it's a highly personal story, and in fact, I'm living and breathing it right now. And I think it'll be valuable to anyone that's on a design team or anyone leading a design team, because my story will help you understand the conditions in which design can thrive and ways that you can shape them. So let's start at the beginning. I work at Etsy. My training is in interaction and systems design. And in fact, much of my talk draws from how I think about systems. In 2016, I joined Etsy as its first ever design strategist. But the thing is that I've been leading the product design team for the past year. My path to leading 30 of the most passionate and skillful and interesting people that I've ever met was totally unexpected. Because up until the moment that I began leading the team, I had been actively trying to avoid management because of this story that I think designers tell each other. I think there's a real stigma that's attached to the decision a designer makes when they become a manager. And it's unseen, but it is truly felt. And it stems from would-be managers losing credibility in the eyes of their peers once they decide to abandon day-to-day practice. Like medicine or the performing arts, design requires practice. We spend our careers learning how to use tools to bring skill and intention together. And when we stop using our tools, we become out of practice. And out-of-practice designers are not held in the same regard as those practicing right now. I experienced this when I made the switch to management. And prior to joining Etsy, I was a design director at an agency creating beautiful, meticulously crafted experiences. And I had established and cultivated a growing UX practice. However, I slowly noticed a deep sense of loss over time because I was no longer creating work with my own two hands. I lost the satisfaction of making. I lost what Malcolm McCullough calls the affirmation of my commitment to mastery. So when I joined Etsy, I made the switch back to becoming an individual contributor. And as an IC, I was doing impactful, enduring work. I was leading signature initiatives like developing the strategy for Etsy to become a carbon neutral marketplace and orchestrating a company-wide agile transformation. But a series of unexpected events last year created a need, and Etsy needed someone to lead the team through this period of change. We'd been on the hunt for a permanent head of design, but the search had been ongoing. And the standstill that teams experience when they're without a leader was beginning to take hold. When I was asked to step in, I didn't hesitate because I felt this deep, deep sense of duty. It was the reputation of the team that drew me to Etsy in the first place. And it's a reputation that I wanted to uphold and advance. So what's the first thing that you do when you're suddenly and unexpectedly tasked with leading? Well, if I'm honest, I mean truly honest, I fired up Google to scan anything that was written on leading design orgs. And turns out there wasn't much at the time, at least anything of substance. And much of what is published are platitudes. Things like hire great designers. Don't believe that you're the smartest person in the room. Encourage designers to pursue side projects. Like, we know this, right? Again, platitudes, right? This one's actually really good. It's something that I believe in deeply. So heading towards a dead end, I turned to traditional literature on business leadership, which is vast and kind of fraught. Many of the timeless ways of thinking about leading can be traced back to this kind of command and control style of leadership that took hold in the 1950s and 60s. Or worse, scientific management approaches to optimizing worker productivity. If anyone's interested in this topic, the Google search here is digital Taylorism. And some of the most enduring lessons of management just hadn't aged well. Lessons from seminal works read as gendered and exclusive. Lessons like prioritize your time and attention. So I finally turned to designerly ways of thinking, seeing, and making to guide how I approach leadership, which has served me really well. And there's one in particular that I'd like to share with you today. It's a cybernetic view of the design process and how it helps us see design leadership in a different light. By seeing it as creating the conditions for designers to do their most creative and groundbreaking work. So let's see how. So during my research, I was exposed to many different styles of leadership that was described by organizational psychologists and work that stretched back to the 1930s. And some of these styles endure, like autocracy, and some styles are self-evident, like coaching, and the rest required some explanation. But the idea behind this approach to leading is that leaders ought to assess the needs of the business and decide which style they ought to adopt. Each style prescribes certain characteristics that the leader ought to possess. So for example, servant leaders ought to lead with high levels of integrity and generosity. But the problem is, as I see it, is that character isn't something that people can just put on when they're getting dressed for work. You and I both know that character is something that's developed over a lifetime. Cybernetics helps us see leadership in a different light. So what is it? It's kind of a funny word. But it is the scientific study of self-regulating systems. Self-regulating systems are dynamic, they are closed-looped, which means that they rely on feedback, and they have goals. They are self-correcting systems. So the root word comes to us from the Greeks, to steer. Imagine that you're on a sailboat with your family after a full day on the water, and the sun is going down, and there's ice-cold beer waiting for you on the dock. You're headed back to port, but a strong gust of wind blows you off course. How do you get back on course? You steer. You compare your current heading with the course that you originally set to reach port. And you steer using your boat's rudder to align the bow of the boat with the port that you can see off in the distance. And you do this over and over and over again until you arrive to safety. This process of acting, sensing, and comparing is how self-regulating systems achieve a goal. It turns out that cybernetic systems are all around us. They're the ubiquitous analog thermostats that you'll find in a typical New York City apartment. And they're shaping our future like this autonomous farming robot. Cybernetics provides a model for understanding how systems like these work. And it's particularly useful for designers and those of us who are overseeing design organizations, because it provides a view of the design process that helps us see leadership as a design activity, this idea of creating the conditions for design to operate in. So the model that you see here describes the process as a series of 3 nested feedback loops. And each one of these loops has its own set of goals, inputs, and outputs. The innermost loop is the one that we typically talk about, and it's the one that I've heard about most today. It's enacted by the user of a product. In this case, the product is something that a user acts upon to achieve a goal. The middle loop is enacted by the designer of the product. It's the designer that creates the conditions in which the user and product operate. Designers learn from the innermost loop to understand how to improve the product experience for the user. And both of these systems are nested within an enclosing loop enacted by the meta designer, creating the conditions for design to operate. Seeing design this way is valuable. It helps us see the different actors and their roles in relationship to each other, and understand how the concerns of a designer and, let's say, a design manager might be ultimately shared, but how their activities are fundamentally different. So if design leadership is about creating conditions, what are the conditions worth designing for? Well, in my experience, there are 5. People, tools, process, operations, and the environment. And what I found is that the quality of these conditions affect the experience of our designers, how they spend their time and energy, and their corresponding levels of motivation, belonging, autonomy, self-efficacy, and mastery. And in fact, all the stuff on the right is kind of its own separate talk. But leading design requires a careful consideration of each, and I want to unpack some of this together with you now. What I found is that creating great people conditions requires treating designers as individuals, as opposed to these economic units for company productivity. And that sounds obvious, right? But turns out bureaucracy can get in the way. Job titles imply people are interchangeable. Salary bands imply that groups of people are equivalent. Great people conditions require individualized approaches to things like skill and career development, mentorship, coaching, and sponsorship. And it's a bit of matchmaking too. It requires carefully matching designers with the work that complements their skills and career aspirations. So process is how we design. It matters to the carpenter, the captain of a firing squad, and the chemical engineer. And it certainly matters to design as well. Hugh Dubberly said it best, our processes determine the quality of our products. And at Etsy, I found that there's this sweet spot between prescribing process and taking a hands-off approach. Design orgs ought to offer a framework for how to design, some basic sequence of steps that designers are expected to take to transform an input to an output. And the number and sequence of steps matter. A single-step process like this, we do some stuff, isn't particularly useful. And two steps seem to set the minimum amount of expectation, like defining a problem before we solve it, or attempting to solve a problem to improve our understanding of it. At Etsy, we rely on the double diamond framework, which is based on this concept of diverging and converging. And I imagine it's a framework that many of you use here. Third and finally, environmental conditions. The environment in which we design includes everything that surrounds us. It's the natural and the human-made. It includes the desk that we sit on and whether we have access to fresh air and natural light. And it's the sum of these factors that support or stymie creativity. And at Etsy, we've begun reshaping our physical environment to meet the ongoing needs of designers and their activities. Here's how. So I want to preface this section by saying our headquarters is incredible. It's located in a breathtaking neighborhood in Brooklyn. And inside, there's all kinds of spaces for quiet reflection, sharing a meal, and of course, work. The kind of work that requires focus and concentration. Deep work. But the way that we work has evolved since our headquarters was built more than 4 years ago. Highly collaborative, workshop-based Google-style design sprints are now an essential method of every designer's toolkit to define problems, prototype solutions, and test them with others. It's the with others part that's really changed. And what we found is that collaboration can be rambunctious. Sprints like the one that you see here are loud. They require lots of vertical surface area to hang work. Sketches, in-progress user flows, screen designs, and sprints like this can take up to a week. The problem is that our existing space is configured for desk work and meetings. So we've been experimenting by creating dedicated, collaborative, adaptable space that's just for design. And its code name is Etsy Design Studio. So last year, we worked with our facilities team to run a pilot. We were given one of the largest meeting rooms at Etsy for half a year and a budget and the freedom to transform it however we saw fit. So we cleared it out and we began thoughtfully adding back in furniture and tools and materials, all the stuff of design, to create this space for ideas to emerge and evolve over days and weeks rather than the hour-bound meeting. The space can handle ongoing design critiques and ad hoc design sprints by making use of movable walls, whiteboards, and furniture. And we recently concluded the pilot and deemed the experiment a success. And we're focused now on making Etsy Design Studio a permanent space by iterating the hacked together furniture and AV prototypes so that they can endure day-to-day use. So to conclude, design leadership, I believe, is about creating the conditions for design to flourish. And seeing leadership this way creates a practical framework for making decisions. The conditions that we identified earlier form a decision set for leaders to weigh. It offers a finite number of choices from which leads can choose to invest or not. So think for a moment about your design org. How would you invest your organization's time and resources? Would you invest in each equally or prioritize one over another, or simply take a laissez-faire approach? These are the questions design leaders ought to ask if they wish to create fertile grounds for design to thrive. Thanks.